Well, it's that time of the season again where I usually do this once every single year, and I usually do this right after decision day. And that is to react on the prediction that I made in the beginning of the year and to look at some prediction that I actually got spot on and some prediction that I predict in the beginning year were wildly wrong at the end of the year. And I already know that there's one prediction that I am just completely wrong. And I know somebody mentioned it on Twitter about the fact that I got that prediction completely wrong. I know that. I've been saying it throughout the year that I felt like that was going to go wrong. And that I even said kind of in the beginning of the season that this team that I predicted that was going to finish near the top of the table. Yeah, now I really regret actually putting them near the top of the table. But before we get to that, let's actually look at the Eastern Conference first before I switch the board and look at the Western Conference and look at the prediction for both of these conferences. We start with the Eastern Conference where I predicted Atlanta United was going to finish top spot in the Eastern Conference, and I wasn't that far off. They actually finished second this season, and that if they only were a little bit better on the road, and that they could at least maybe pick up a couple of points on the road this season, they could have maybe finished top spot of the Eastern Conference. And that's even with the bad run that they had in the beginning of the season. I mean, this team, the way that they've been playing throughout the year, you could definitely argue that they deserve to be at the top of the Eastern Conference, but the only reason why that is not the case is because their road form this year has been absolutely terrible, and it's probably the worst road form that they have been ever since they entered this league a couple of years ago. Then I say the Red Bulls was going to finish second place, and this is where I kind of got it wrong, and that they actually finished sixth. And the reason why the Red Bulls finished that low in the table is they didn't have any consistency. I mean, there's times where the Red Bulls, you could say that they look like a team from last season and a team that could definitely compete for MLS Cup. And then there's times where you're kind of scratching your head and thinking, how in the world did they lose to this team? And how in the world did they drop so many points at home this season? I mean, they're just too inconsistent, and that makes me a little bit worried about the Red Bulls heading into the playoffs where, in a one and done kind of playoffs, you cannot be a team that come into that playoff structure being very inconsistent because, in order to win MLS Cup this year, I think you just have to be consistent in every single game and that you cannot afford to have one bad game throughout this playoffs this season. Then I said DC United was going to finish third place, which in the end they actually finished fifth, and they could have finished fourth if they would have actually scored a goal against FC Cincinnati and would have had home field advantage in the first round. But DC is another team that I thought they were kind of being very inconsistent, and that they actually had a stretch where they were just looking so bad that I question how in the world they were able to stay above the red line for so long. But of course they did kind of turn it on a little bit at the end of the year. But like I said, they could have had home field advantage if they would have at least scored a goal against FC Cincinnati, and that's an FC Cincinnati team that was down 9 men for the remaining of the game. Then I said the Union was actually going to finish fourth in the Eastern Conference. Where they actually finished was third place, and they for majority of the year actually were at the top of the Eastern Conference, but I also kind of felt like eventually, despite the fact that I think they're considered one of those teams that is one of the biggest surprise. I always knew that the Union could be a team that could improve from last year, and that especially with the pieces that they have and also this new system, I really believe Jim Curtin can actually make this pressing system that the Union is implementing this year work. That's why I thought they were going to finish high in the table, and that that pressing system that they've been running throughout the season actually work out. And there were a couple of unsung names that I mentioned in the beginning of the year that I didn't kind of mention but really kind of step up this year. Guys like Shabilko, Jerome Montero, Sergio Santos, and all these other guys that you probably have never heard of them before, but they were a key contributor of why the Union were near the top of the Eastern Conference for majority of the year. Now, then I said NYCFC was gonna finish fifth in the standings, but they actually end up finished top of the Eastern Conference and look like they are the best team in the Eastern Conference right now. And surprisingly, despite the fact that I thought they would take a step back when David Villa left this team last year, and that, with all these kind of signings that's coming in the winter transfer window and how it's kind of a little bit unproven, I feel like NYCFC was going to take a step back, and especially with Domai Turin, knowing how he did in the first season when he was in charge of this team. Yeah, there was writings on the wall that NYCFC was going to take a step back, but instead, that was not the case. In fact, in many ways, they kind of took a huge step forward, then a step back in this season, as pretty much all the signings that they have made throughout this season, guys like Aber and also Matrita, has really been the key contributor of this team, and that, something tells me this is probably the best NYCFC team that I have seen from this season, and that's without David Villa in their starting 11. Like, in the past, without David Villa in the starting 11 for this NYCFC team, this team just basically folded. But because some of those signings have really kind of made up for and kind of almost as if, as soon as they gave up, they basically don't have David Villa anymore because he decided to leave. It felt like they already kind of had a plan to try to replace him, even though before we didn't know exactly what the plan is, and that their plan was actually bring some unknown kind of talent that actually work out at the end of the day. Then I said the Columbus Crew was actually going to finish 6th in the standings, but unfortunately they actually finished 10th in the table. And to be fair, I will say this: if it wasn't for that bad run that they had between May to July, where I think they were on a stretch where they didn't win a game in 16 matches, and that was really the reason why it really kind of killed their season this year. They weren't actually that bad this year. I mean, the beginning of the season, they definitely shown sign that they looked like a team that could compete for the playoffs. And they also showed that sign again in the latter part of the season, where not only they were playing as a spoiler row kind of team, but they looked like a team that was thinking about maybe climbing back into the playoff contention. Although it's too bad that when they tried to do that, it was kind of already too late, and that we knew that this team was done and dusted for the rest of the season. And by the way, later tonight I will do a moving forward series talk about the Columbus Crew, and I will say with the Crew, I think that next season I won't be surprised if this team gets back into the playoffs, because now with Caleb Porter a full year under the Crew, and that I don't think he did a bad job with this team. He's still trying to learn these players and see how they can, of course, implement it into the system that he want to put in this team. It's going to be interesting to see how they are going to do moving forward. Now, the next team I predicted is Montreal, who I predicted that they were going to finish 7th place. It turns out they finished 9th place this season, and yeah, they kind of collapsed in the second half of the season, and part of that collapse is because they didn't have PLD for majority of the year, and that in the beginning of the season they were basically just treading water, and hopefully they could just bunker and counter-attacking team, and somehow that actually worked out. But it's going to take a huge effort to try to do that, and that it's only a matter of times where you can only go as far as just bunkering every game, and hopefully you can score a goal off the counter by that much, because eventually it's not going to work out, and it really kind of finally caught up to this Impact team as we head into the second half of the season, where they kind of collapsed. But hey, at least the Impact did win the Canadian Championship, and they are going to be moving on to CCL heading into next season. Now, the next team I predicted to finish 8th is the Chicago Fire, and I think this is one of the two teams that I actually got the prediction spot on. I said the Fire was going to finish 8th place. They actually finished 8th place, and I thought, with this Fire team, I knew that I was kind of a little bit uncertain with the fact that yes, they have a lot of good attacking piece, but what about the defense? And it turns out, that was kind of one of the issue that they had this season, where the defense kind of wasn't good enough for them. And also the other reason why they didn't make the playoffs is because they are a very inconsistent team. Like, this is a team that you just don't know what are they going to do on match day, where you sometimes see a Chicago Fire team that looked like one of the best team in the league, and then you sometimes see a Chicago Fire team that just doesn't even show up whatsoever. I mean, and if that is the case, it's only fitting the fact that this team, of course, just finished outside of the playoff spot. Then I said the New England Revolution was going to finish 9th place. It turns out they actually finished 7th place. And to be fair, nobody thought in the beginning of the year that Bruce Arena was going to be coming back to coach a team in MLS, let alone the New England Revolution, and that what he has done with this team has really kind of helped out and really kind of boosted this team into a playoff kind of contention team. Although I will say this with the Revs, they definitely have not looked very good in the last couple of games, and that they are really going to be facing the odds when they play their playoff game against Atlanta United, who was the team that beat them on decision day. Then I said FC Cincinnati was going to finish 10th place in the standings, and it turns out they actually won the wooden spoon. We knew that FC Cincinnati, one of the things that I really worry about them is goal scoring, and Lord and behold, they were the team that scored the least amount of goals this season. I mean, I'm pretty sure even a person that doesn't know a lot of MLS stuff, but at least know a little bit of the fact that, if you don't have an attacker on your team and you sign a million midfielder, you're not going to score a lot of goals. And that was, of course, the case for FC Cincinnati, and that as much as they were trying to maybe bunker and trying to counter against the other team, the problem is if you don't have a attacker that is fast enough to counterattack, and also you don't have a defense that can bunker and leave holes on the defensive end in a low block kind of team, you are going to get absolutely exposed, and that is exactly what happened to FC Cincinnati this season. Then I said Orlando City was going to finish 11th place, and guess what? They actually finished 11th place this season, although I'm pretty sure I would have actually got this wrong if Orlando City, just like Chicago, if they only were a little bit more consistent, and that there was just so many what-ifs in some of their games, that I feel like if those what-ifs turns out to be 3 points, this team would not be down near the bottom of the Eastern Conference, and that this will not be another year where Orlando City fans will have to endure another painful year of not making the playoffs. Then finally, I said Toronto FC was going to finish dead last in the Eastern Conference, and I think this is the one that I actually got completely wrong, and the one that I actually didn't. I almost forgot the fact that I predicted TFC to finish dead last in the table, because I thought that this was going to be a rebuilding year for them, and that, earlier in the season, it looks like there was signs shown that they look like they could be a team that can finish dead last in the standing. But credit to TFC with the fact that they, of course, signed a couple of key pieces with Pozuelo as one of their main pieces to come in there, and they have looked like a very respectable team for the last couple of months, and that the other thing that they, of course, will get as a reward to that is that they, of course, are going to be hosting a playoff game at BMO Field. So, they, of course, end up finished 4th, and that I think this was really the only prediction that I got absolutely wrong in terms of the Eastern Conference. But the rest of them, not bad. I mean, at least I got 2 out of 12 right in terms of this, and some of them were relatively close, and that some things that I said in the beginning of the season where I thought this team was going to go throughout the season was kind of true. But now I'm going to switch the board and look at the Western Conference and look at the teams that in the beginning of the year where I predicted them and where they actually finish at the end of the year. Alrighty, so let's take a look at the Western Conference. And you remember earlier in the video where I said that I got this prediction completely wrong, where I thought this team was going to finish near the top of the table, and they end up finishing near the bottom of the table. Well, that team is Sporting KC. And yeah, I can finally admit to say that I was absolutely wrong in terms of this prediction, and that it seemed like every year I always have one team where I predict they will do very well, and then they just completely drop the ball, and that I get the prediction absolutely wrong. This was the one. And I feel like when I look at how Sporting KC season had went, I clearly did not learn my mistake from last time, where remember last year when I predicted TFC was going to finish first in the Eastern Conference? Guess what happened? They finished 12th in the Eastern Conference. Well, they actually finished 11th in the Eastern Conference, but back then it was dead last in the Eastern Conference. So, yep, guess I didn't learn my same mistake, and I guess maybe next year I gotta know that if I feel like a team is going to make a deep run into CCL, most likely they're not going to do very well, because it's been proven when teams play in CCL and that they go into deep run, yeah, they could definitely be having a very bad season, because injury is going to take a toll of the team, and that they will never able to have a second half resurgence of what we really thought that was going to happen. Now, to talk about a prediction that I almost got right is LAFC, who I thought they were going to finish second, but they actually finished as the best team in the Western Conference, and also as the Supporters' Shield winner. Now, to be fair, I also did say at the beginning of the season where I was kind of deciding whether or not if I would have put LAFC or Sporting KC at first, and that I could have easily gone with LAFC at first place, because, I thought they were going to be much better, and that I really think this team could be very similar to Atlanta United. And in many ways, this team is really similar to Atlanta, where is a team that, had a great second half season, and then in the latter part, they kind of falter a little bit, and now you are expecting them to kind of bounce back. Because remember how Atlanta, we were doubting them whether or not they're going to make a deep playoff run, because they got off they got off to a really bad run at the end of the season, and guess what happened? They went all the way to MLS Cup and winning the whole thing. So I won't be surprised if it's going to be the same case for LAFC, and there's no doubt that they are the favorites of winning MLS Cup this season. Then I said the Seattle Sounders was going to finish third place, and it turns out they actually finished in second place, and this is another team that I thought they were going to be like near the top three of the Western Conference. Turns out they finished second place, and the way that they got second place wasn't that easy, because they did had some bad runs throughout the season, not really in the first half of the season, but more like in the second half of the season, but somehow in some way they still are able to get themselves in second place right now, and is another team that, I want to say they can make a deep run into the playoffs, but what I'm very concerned about this Sounders team is that if they have one major injury to their star-studded player, they could be in serious trouble, because this team just does not have any depth whatsoever. Then I said the Portland Timbers was going to finish fourth place, because I thought they were going to recover in the second half of the season with all the home games, and it turns out they actually finished sixth. And it also turns out that home games wasn't actually the reason why I thought they actually away game wasn't the reason why I thought they were going to really struggle early, and that eventually they will bring it home once they have all those home games in the back end of the schedule. It was actually the opposite thing. It was actually the home schedule that was a big concern with this team, and if they, of course, didn't beat San Jose on the final day of the season, they could have been out of the playoffs. I mean, despite the fact that they're in sixth, and you think, okay, it's maybe because they got off to a bad run in the start of the season and then kind of recovered with that home stretch. Yeah, no, that exactly didn't happen, and that in many ways that home stretch almost killed their chances of making the playoffs. And if that actually would be the case, that would be one of the biggest surprise of the season, and probably one of the biggest collapse of the season, knowing that you have all these home games, and a team that usually do not lose at home just struggles so much this season at home. Now, I then predicted the Galaxy was going to finish fifth place, and guess what? They actually finished fifth place, although technically they could have finished higher than where they are, if only in the last two games they just didn't completely shit the beds. And when you look at these last two games from the Galaxy, it just does not give me a lot of hope. The fact that they're going to go deep into the playoffs, and that unless if this team can outscore their opponent and those top attacking piece with Pavone and Zlatan can performing in the playoffs, yeah, I don't have a lot of faith that this team can go deep into playoff. And especially when you do not have a good defense heading into the playoffs, that is not a good recipe of making a deep run. In fact, it probably is a disastrous recipe of potentially exiting in the playoffs in the first round or even in the early part of the playoffs. Then I said RSL was going to finish 6th place in the Western Conference, and they actually finished 3rd in the Western Conference at the end of the year. And part of the reason why they finished 3rd is they virtually won pretty much almost every single home game this season, and they did just enough to get some points on the road where they can be in the top half of the table. And this is also an example of what happened when you are a team that, you might not be a good team on the road, but as long as if you win most of your home games and able to get crucial points on the road, you are going to be a team that is gonna maybe challenge for a top 4 spot. And lo and behold, that's what exactly RSL done this season, and that is the reason why they're actually finished in 3rd place. Then I said Minnesota was going to finish in 7th place, and it turns out that they actually finished 4th place. And Minnesota is basically the same story as RSL, a team that is basically untouchable at home. On the road, they just got enough points on the road where they can be a top 4 team, and that is exactly what happened. Although I'm pretty sure Loons fans are going to be a little bit disappointed the fact that they could have easily had 2nd place if they would have beat the Sounders on the last day of the season, but unfortunately they didn't, and now they of course fall into that 4th position, which you're still going to get a home playoff game, but just know that you are going to be playing against the best team in the league if they are able to win that first round playoffs. Then I said that Dallas was going to narrowly miss the playoffs in 8th place, and it turns out they actually got into the playoffs. And that, again, to be fair, I actually almost got this right with the fact that I thought the reason why Dallas wasn't going to make the playoffs, partially because I don't know how this new youth movement that Dallas has is going to fare this season, and that with a new coach and a new batch of players from this Dallas Academy pipeline, you don't know exactly if it's going to gel in the first year. And the other thing that I also worry is that Dallas is going to have their annual collapse at the end of the season. And they kind of did have that for part of the second half of the season, but in the last couple of games, they really kind of right the ship, and that, in the last couple of games they were able to get some key victory and some key points, and that is exactly why they of course made it the playoffs. Although my confidence of them actually going to go deep or do anything in the playoffs is definitely not very strong, because this is still a team that I think if down the stretch, if they were to have to play games on the road, then I think it would have been a different story, because this team just cannot win on the road this season. Then you got the Rapids, which I thought they were going to finish in 9th place. And guess what? They actually did finish in 9th place. And then as much as the Rapids, in the second half of the season, they were besides LAFC, the best team in the Western Conference because of that 12-game winless run. And I'm going to once again mention it when I talk about the moving forward series. Because of that bad run that they had in the start of the season, they just dug themselves way too deep of a hole, and that, to be fair, they almost pulled off probably one of the greatest comeback you'll ever seen in MLS, where a team would dig themselves that deep in the hole, and yet somehow, in some way, they still find a way to make it to the playoffs. But unfortunately, that isn't the case, and that they, of course, finish outside of the playoffs. Then I said the Whitecaps was actually going to finish in 10th place because, it's a rebuilding year for the Whitecaps. I'm guessing that they probably would at least improve in a bit in terms of this rebuilding, and it turns out that was not the case. And in fact, this rebuilding, I feel like they're going to have to start all over again, because they finished dead last in the Western Conference. Clearly, some of the signings that they made during this offseason didn't work whatsoever, and that now they're going to have to try to restart this rebuild, and hopefully they can, of course, not finish dead last again heading into next season. Then I said the Dynamo was actually going to finish 11th place because I didn't trust their defense, and also the fact that, I don't know exactly, if they, of course, saw Elise or Menottes or both of them during this season, then this Dynamo team is not going to win a lot of games. Now, it turns out they didn't sell Elise and Menottes, but the reason why the Dynamo finished so low in the table is not only they didn't win any games, well, they won a couple of games on the road, but they still had like the worst road record in the Western Conference, but they also start dropping points at home. And this is a team that relied so much on their home form to get into the playoffs, where they just dropped way too many points this season on at home, and that in many ways they kind of also had a similar collapse that they had last year, where it's usually near the second half of the season, right around August, that's when they started to kind of implode, and that it basically kind of happened again this season. And that the only difference is this season they didn't win the US Open Cup, and last season they did, so they're not going to go to the CONCACAF Champions League heading into next season. Then finally, I said that the San Jose Earthquakes was going to finish in 12th place, but indeed they actually they finished in 8th place, and this was the one that I actually wanted to be wrong, because I really want this Quakes team to prove me wrong. The fact that, the same squad that we have is going to actually do something because of what Almeida brings to the team. And for most part of the season, it seemed like that was the case, and that Almeida was basically working wonders with this team. But ultimately, it did caught up to the team. And despite the fact that I know coaching is very important in this league, the second thing that is also important in this league is talent. And this Quakes team, they don't really have a lot of talent, and they're a team that is full of guys that you wouldn't think should be anywhere near in terms of making the playoffs. And especially, as I said, they keep pretty much almost everybody in that roster from last season that won 4 games, and that to say that they can, of course, just completely turn it around and have a chance to make the playoffs and be in a playoff position for so long this season is quite incredible. But obviously, the thing that I will also say is, this season, the way it ended, kind of really leave a lot of sour taste in a lot of Quakes fans' mouth, because while I know we didn't expect to make the playoffs, we didn't think that it would be an epic collapse in the last month of the season is the reason why we miss out the playoffs and be the odd man out in terms of trying to get those last 2 spots in the playoffs. But either way, guys, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button. I mean, when I look at the Western Conference, I can say that at least I got pretty much every team right of making the playoffs when I predicted in the beginning of the season, except Sporting KC, because I already said earlier, this was one team that I feel like I just got it completely wrong in the beginning of the season, and it turns out I actually did get it completely wrong. But at least I got most of the team that I predict making the playoffs in the beginning of the year actually made it to the playoffs, and I predicted the teams that's going to miss the playoffs to actually miss the playoffs this season. And I also got a couple of teams right in terms of exactly where they finish at the end of the season. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Obviously, let's hope next season I can be a little bit better with these predictions. I am definitely not a prediction genius, and that some will say I'm actually really bad in terms of prediction. But at least I think this season you could maybe say I did much better than last season, because last season I think I did well with the Western Conference, but I didn't do very well with the Eastern Conference. And this season I think I did a little bit better in terms of predicting the Eastern Conference. And I also think maybe this year, last year I don't think I remember I predicted 6 out of the 7 teams I predict that is going to make the playoffs actually made it the playoffs at the end of the season. And this season, that of course is the case. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I of course will see you guys next time.